As I continue talking about configuring the PSSDiag configuration manager, we're going to look at scenarios next, and I'm going to focus on in this video on the first 3 or 4. And I'm going to be talking quite a bit about not just the performance of SQL Server, but the performance of the PSSDiag tool. Now, PSSDiag gathers a lot of information, and on a busy system especially, this can affect performance. I've had that question asked many times, and yes, it can affect performance, but it depends on how busy the system is, and it depends on which events you are capturing, and specifically how often those events occur. So I'm going to look at a couple of these and show you what the general and the detailed and the light performance will gather for us, but I'm also going to talk about kind of the differences between the two and what is important about that configuration. So let's start with general. Now, there's a lot of things that are gathered that don't really matter in terms of will it affect the performance of the system, and they might be quite useful information. So we gather some cursor events here, implicit conversion by default, that's not much. Under the database group, we gather log growth and log shrinking. Okay, there are circumstances that might be important too. We gather almost all of the error events that are listed here. Under execution, we gather a few things about autostats and plan guide use. Let's see. We also gather, we're under general. We gather RPC completed and RPC starting. So every time we run a procedure call, we're going to see one event when that starts and one event when that stops. Now, the completed events are all more useful because they'll show us the start time and the stop time for the event. And they'll show us what kind of resources, how much CPU, how many reads and writes were generated during the execution of that procedure. The starting event can't give us all that information. We'll see the start time, but we won't be able to see the resource usage or anything else. We see a cache remove. We'll see batch starting and completed, which is much like RPC started and completed, only for a batch statement that's being executed as opposed to an actual procedure, and statement recompile. So these events are actually really important. The events we see under execution are really important for us understanding performance-wise what's going on, because we can see the procedures and see what the resource usage for different procedures are. So what else do we have? Under lock, we have information about deadlocks, lock escalation, and timeouts, all good things. Memory, server memory change. So if there's a memory change on SQL Server above a certain threshold, we'll have an event for that, and you'll have information about the memory change. And session, information about logins, logouts, and existing connections. Now, to talk about the tool itself, and as I've said, it can affect the performance of the system. If it's a development system, if it's a system that doesn't have a lot of users on it, you probably don't need to be concerned about this, especially if you're using an X events trace, which is the default. If you're using Profiler, and I really wouldn't recommend it, Profiler is going to be more likely to be less performant than X events. It's basically the reason X events were created, was to give us a more performant way to capture this information. Now, under execution, there are other events we can take, and actually if I change from general performance to detailed, really the only difference here is we have some extra events under execution. We get post-execution show plan. We get SP statement completed, SP statement starting, SQL statement starting, and SQL statement completed. So what's the big difference here? First, you're going to be gathering a lot more events. First, the execution plan, and there are multiple options for getting execution plans. If you get post-execution show plan, you'll get the most information. I typically, if I'm going to capture plans, if I need to, I'll capture this one as opposed to the pre-execution or post-compilation, because this will give me more information about what were our estimates versus what were the actuals in terms of how many rows were returned, how many times we performed a given index seek. The information from the post-execution show plan, it has more that it can provide to us. But you're going to get an event in this trace every time you run a non-trivial statement. If SQL Server has to generate an execution plan for it, even if it's a simple, select one row from a given table, you're going to get an event for that. You won't get it for something trivial like an if statement or flow control, that kind of thing. But So every time there's a non-trivial statement, you're going to get an event. So that's an event that's going to happen very, very often. You're going to get a lot of those events, and the more data you're asking this tool to capture, the more likely it is. Well, the more likely it is to affect performance on the system. So the general performance would gather RPC completed and RPC starting. Gathering SP statement completed and SP statement starting. So inside the stored procedure, we're going to get an event for each statement that we run when it starts and another one when it stops. So, and just think about it. You could have, a procedure could have 20, 50, 100 individual statements inside it. So if you turn on detailed performance, you're going to be gathering 20, 50, 100 times as many statements, 100 times as many events, because you're doing it at the statement level, not just at the procedure level. So, and the same goes for SQL batch events versus SQL statement events. You're going to be capturing a lot more events for that. So if you're capturing the statement level events and you're capturing an execution plan, that can add up. If it's on a busy system, you can really see a difference. You may see from observing what kind of weights are going on SQL Server, you may see weights that point to the tracing itself as a cause of contention, as a cause of delays in the system. I've seen this especially, well, at least I've seen this with profiler traces. I've seen this take up, generate so much contention on the system that I could no longer tell what the original performance problem was. So especially if we're trying to gather information about performance of SQL Server, we don't want our tool to give us a completely different scenario or to significantly change what we are looking at. So I tend to be very careful about PSSDiag, especially if it's on a system I haven't run PSSDiag before. I'll be much more likely to go with a general performance trace than a detailed. And then, I'd rather honestly have a situation where I run the general trace and realize from that point, you know what, I really need to have the statement level events, or I really need to gather execution plans. I'd really rather run a general trace the first time and then maybe come back later on and get a detailed one if I decide I really need it. Another couple quick options. The light performance option. Notice we're not getting errors, we're not getting locks, we're not getting database, we're not getting anything. We've just got events under execution. And when I look, I see we've got RPC completed and batch completed. That's about as light gets. But this will still give us a lot of information. This will show us all the stored procedures and all the batches running on the system, and we'll be able to see, since we've only got the completed events, not the starting events, that's another way to trim things down. And like I said, the completed events have more information. If you have the completed event, it'll tell you everything the starting event could have told you, plus more. So this will tell us every stored procedure and every statement that's running and what kind of resources they're consuming. So that actually is a lot of information. But you're going to be losing a lot of context if you go with light performance. But there may be cases if you're running a very busy system that is really throwing out, tens and tens of thousands of transactions per second, 100,000 transactions per second, you might need to go with a light performance trace instead of one of the others. Now, we've got one more option here, query performance. We have, under scheduling, we have information on wait info. And under execution, we have query post-execution show plan. So this seems very targeted. It's giving us wait information, it's giving us show plans after execution. It's not giving us statement level events, so it would be difficult to know, it might be difficult to know what statement this is going along with. This might be something that you would add to another trace, like you could perhaps, and note these are all checkboxes, you could say do a general performance trace and add in query performance if you want to get the show plans and you want to get wait information. That'd be another way to combine it. So I think this is quite a lot of a topic just to talk about the performance itself. In the next video, we'll talk more about some of the other options we have under scenarios and some of the other tabs here in the tool.